Hello, Pastor Steve here in beautiful Visalia, California, where spring is beginning to peek from behind the cold, wet clouds of winter. I hope you're having a great day as you tune in today. This is Forgiveness Equals Freedom podcast, and the podcast is dedicated to helping people understand the practical steps and mindset that lead to the heart's ability to let go of injury from the past so that we can embrace joy going forward in our lives. So today on this podcast, we're going to look at the first step or stage of forgiveness as it's been practiced in my life and in the church that I pastor for a long time now, probably 10, 11, 12 years. We have been chasing the idea of the practical steps of forgiveness. The first step is telling the story. And let me talk about why it's necessary to tell the story. The first part is in telling the story, we get it out of us. Most of us, when we're really injured enough to be worried about how to forgive a person, we carry the sense of betrayal, the sense of rage, the sense of shame that goes with big dust ups and difficulties in our lives. We carry those inside and we chew on them. They lead us to fantasize about what we would say if we had the opportunity, about visiting the shame or the sadness that we feel on the person who or people who have hurt us. We all act the same internally when we are harmed by somebody or a situation. And as that time goes forward, if that's all that you do, what you're doing is you're pouring poison upon poison into your own heart and soul, and you slowly devolve from a person with many facets in your life, able to enjoy a broad range of things internally and externally, to a person who has centered your existence more or less on the person or people who harmed you. And it's easy to become so focused that you believe all of the bad in your life is because of them, and you begin to filter everything through that situation and through the poison that you're allowing to build up in your soul and in your heart. And as that process takes place, it takes you out of the existence of life that most of us want, which is the ability to enjoy people who do love us in our lives, the ability to find purpose in our lives. It's not a purpose in life to seek retribution or revenge on those that have hurt us. So, in telling the story, a lot of people come to the first time that they have been asked to divulge, right, to get the story out onto paper or in the presence of another safe human being, right, to get the story out of ourselves so that it begins to change and look and seem a little bit different than it has before is a necessary step to healing. I teach a course called Mending the Soul. It's offered nationwide. I'm just one of thousands of teachers, and it's dedicated to helping people who are victims of trauma and abuse. And I was delighted to find, after having established that there are four basic steps to forgiveness in most of the forgiveness programs, when I took Mending the Soul and then began to lead it, I was delighted to find that the first step in Mending the Soul is also telling the story. The way they do it is they have a timeline, and they ask you to list all the positive and negative things in your life on the timeline of your life. That's a little bit different process, but it affects the same. It gives people a chance to talk about their story. In the Forgiveness Challenge, which is what we call the program here in our church in Visalia, step one is telling the story, not necessarily with a timeline. We would like you to pick an incident. You may have a whole boatload of things that you need to work on, but just pick one. It could be the most recent, or it could be the longest simmering one. Pick something that happened that harmed you, that harmed you sometimes emotionally, sometimes physically, whatever it might be, right? Pick that incident and write about it. And when we talk about telling the story or writing the story, here is some advice based on experience. It's much better to do the first draft of telling the story without editing it as you write. So don't wait for a proper order or a theme to emerge. Just get what's inside of you outside of you. Again, you can write this down on your computer or on paper, or if you're not a writer really, you can find a confidant, a therapist or a counselor or a pastor or a family member or friend who you absolutely trust to hear the anger and the hurt that's inside of you. You have to find an outlet to tell your story. And in the first telling, it's okay just to emote, just to talk about how horrible and terrible you think the other people were, about how it's stained your life since that time, about how unfair it is, about what you wish would happen to the person, whatever it is that's inside of you. You got to get that stuff out of you because it's poison. It's no good for you, right? And so telling the story is a way to begin the process by throwing up the poison that most of us have ingested and then actually increased through our own habits of chewing on these things and rehearsing the hurt over and over. So tell the story, get it out of you in just kind of a bleed out type of form. And then after that has happened, take a little bit of time away, eventually go back to the work, and then you can begin to refine the story and tell it in a more reasonable or a healthier way than maybe you started with. Let me illustrate that real quick. So, in our church right now, we are following the same progress as this podcast. So, this Sunday, I will preach on telling the story. And here is the story that I'll be telling. It's a story about a lay person in a church that I served in Colorado who came into the church and love bombed us. That's a term for how narcissists start relationships, right? So she thought I was the most genius pastor she'd ever seen. She thought the lay people were the brightest and best looking, right? She thought all of our children were winners. She just loved us immediately. We were like no other church she'd ever had. She herself was a counselor, which is crazy to me, but she was. And so she love bombed us, and everybody adored her, and she just made us feel special. And then she approached me to start a program where she would teach lay people to counsel other lay people at a proper level. And I said that would be great. And we put her in that position. We let her recruit assistants, and then we uh, helped helped with the mechanism of trying to launch that program. In the meantime, like all narcissists, as soon as she thought that she kind of owned us emotionally, she turned. She turned on me. She turned on the church. She turned on lay people that were helping her with her task of starting up that ministry. And when she turned, it was horrible. She went from the love bombing, again, this is a narcissistic thing, right? From the love bombing to criticizing everything and effectively saying that she couldn't stand the fact that we pretended to be a good church when actually we were horrible. What she was actually saying is that she needed to run the church and we all needed to just toe the line and do what we were told. It was crazy. The destruction that she brought to the church, to me personally, as well as to the people that were assisting her, and to the whole congregation. There was a dis-ease when this narcissist went from the sweet part of the opening relationship to the horrors of what it's like to really deal with a narcissist. So that's the story, right? When I dealt with this story a long time ago, about 10 years, I guess, when I worked the steps of forgiveness on this individual. So in the first rendering of the story, when I first addressed it, I wrote a great deal about how evil and wicked she was, and about how she deserved to be punished, and I needed to warn other people about her, and whatever. Kind of a lot of crazy came out of me, thinking that if I could hurt her back somehow, that would make me feel better, or if I could make her feel the shame and the sorrow that I felt, that would make her feel better or make me feel better. So I don't have the written record anymore. I destroy them after I'm done because they're full of poison oftentimes. But that first draft felt good to me to get it out, right? To just have no reins on me to express the fundamental depth of the emotions that were inside of me caused by this situation. After I let it sit a while, I went back to it. Step two of step one, right? So telling the story, first draft, second draft. In the second draft, I was able to gain a little bit of distance from the situation. I felt relieved actually to have have thrown up some of the poisonous side. And in the second draft, I began to use different language, and I did that intentionally because I wanted to look at the situation from a healthier perspective. So in the second draft, I wrote the story of an encounter in my life with a narcissist. The way I chose to describe it at that time was with another narcissist, because like most people, I had had lots of run-ins with narcissists along the way. So in the second draft, I told the story of a narcissist who came in and love bombed not only me, but the whole church, which made her one of the top-rated narcissists I've ever seen, right? She was so good at the dark and evil art of narcissism and looking to get your hooks in other people and control and use them. She was top-rated narcissist, maybe even narcissist of the year. So I wrote about it, right. I had a narcissist come into my life, and I let the narcissist into my church. And at that point in telling the story, I had to confess in the writing that a big part of the harm that was done was the fact that I had been unwise and had not recognized her narcissism. I didn't identify the love bombing for what it was. That caused shame in me. And that shame was added to other untreated shame from a very long time in my life. And so what the narcissist did felt oversized to me. In other words, the damage that she did, and it was considerable, touched damage and shame and hurt from other incidents, and so it became larger than it needed to be. In the telling of that story, I talked about having had to deal with somebody who I had given kind of the keys and the authority that was mine to give in that situation, having to deal with somebody with mental illness once they're set free and they think that they are unencumbered by good sense or any kind of rule. And my memory of writing the second draft and then a third draft after that was that I began to feel the release that I talk about all the time on this podcast and here in our church. It began to feel better to me, if that's the right word, to know, well, what really happened was that this woman had developed mental illness, right? Narcissism is a developmental mental illness. It's caused by trauma that goes untreated correctly. In other words, trauma that's never forgiven, and the poison that I talk about that builds up inside all of us, it built up inside this woman until she was really a horrible form of a human being, still made in God's image and still possible that she would be redeemed. But when she came into my life, she was literally mentally ill, incapable any longer of being reasonable in her emotional attachments. So writing about the time that somebody who was emotionally ill came in and got one over on me, and how I had to then kind of redouble my efforts to remove her from the church, as well as to try to help the church heal, etc. That was a lot better and healthier for me to understand. It took some of the shame out of the equation, and it helped me understand, well, as evil as she was, and boy, she really practiced the dark arts at a high level. As evil as she was really just another narcissist, right? Situationally, it embarrassed me, and I had to work really hard, and it wreaked havoc inside of me. But ultimately, she was just another narcissist. She was just one more person taking advantage of other people to try to heal herself that way. And you can hear in the language that I use as I remember the way I described her in drafts 2 and 3, that there began to be emotional distance. Now it wasn't an affront to justice itself or proof that life is horrible or whatever it was that I felt before. It really was, it gave me the ability to have the distance to see, well, I'm just a human being, and I came into contact with another human being, and that contact didn't go well, partly because of her own mental illness, partly because of my own lack of wisdom and my own untreated trauma. And when I got to that point, and it took quite a while to get all 3 drafts done, when I got to that point, I could feel myself begin to feel different about the situation. I guess the best way to describe it is it was much less personal and much more factual. So now I was telling the story not from throwing up all the emotions that it caused inside of me, but from a more considered point of view, and it just began the release of my heart in that situation, kind of the personal investment in it, and it cured before I ever even really got to step two. It really did cure my desire for revenge, and I had a strong desire for revenge. I loved the church with a passion, and she had hurt me, and worse than that, honestly, she'd hurt the church, and she did it on purpose. And I really wanted to go and hurt her and make her afraid to hurt any other church for a very long time. Doing step one took that away from me. It's not my job to go make the world a just place and becoming as wicked and evil as the people like her that hurt churches or hurt individuals. That doesn't do anything except for increase evil in the world. I could not see those basic truths until I had the discipline of sitting down to tell the story and allowing myself to be honest in the first draft and then to consider the story from kind of through a different filter or with a little bit more distance in the second and the third drafts. It's a really powerful experience. In my case, I shared the story with my wife, who sadly was there during the midst of the storm anyway, but she did what we want listeners when we tell the story to do. She didn't make suggestions about how I could be smarter the next time, and she didn't clarify, well, you acted this way, or right. She listened to the story, and when it was done, especially the first time that I read her my first draft, she just said, "I'm so sorry." And if you choose to share your story with somebody else, with a counselor or a pastor or whatever, you should clarify with them that you don't want advice and you don't expect them to fix it, that it's a part of the process of divulging what has happened in order to get yourself ready for the rest of the process. And all you want from them is for them to love you when you begin and love you when it's over, not to clarify or change or interpret differently. They're just in the position where you ask them to receive the pain and the hurt that you're going to pour out, and in that way they serve a great purpose. So step one of getting down to business of saying, look, enough of this. I do not want this person or this incident to be the determining factor of how I view all other people in the rest of my life. Step one is telling the story in the nitty gritty emotional way, as well as in the second and third ways with a little more distance, framing it with a kind of a step back from it so that you get a handle on your own humanity and the humanity of the other person. In order to do that, it could take a very long time. This first step could take 6 months or a year, because what you'll discover is in order to unpack the story in a healthier way, you may have to do some research. This lady is the first one that really started me on the path of understanding I better find out some stuff about narcissism, where it comes from, why it's so prevalent, and why a full blown, a high level narcissist is such a twisted work. And so I spent a lot of time in between first draft, second draft, and third draft studying the mental illness of narcissism at that high of a level and coming to terms with her humanity and kind of her backstory. I didn't know her backstory, but I could cobble together the basics of it because of her narcissism. That study and that diligence and that pouring myself into the process, it really paid dividends. It made a huge difference in my life. It was one of the first breakthroughs I had in the practice of forgiveness, and it was so powerful by the time I got to the end of all four steps that the quality of my life had changed. And then as I practiced these four steps in other situations, that just continued to increase the health and the joy and the peace I felt even in the presence of narcissists. All of that increased immensely as I began to understand the reward for having the discipline of working on my problems in this way, in what I would loosely call the way that Jesus exampled with his own sacrifice and with his forgiveness of even those who crucified him. When we are faithful in that way, the rewards are amazing. When we're not, when we hold these things inside, when we think nobody else would understand or nobody else has ever been through this or whatever it is that goes on inside of us, we deny ourselves the ability to receive the full blessing of God's Holy Spirit. And the full blessing of God's Holy Spirit is an embrace of life and a joy in the presence of the people around us. So I hope if you're tuning into the podcast, if you find this meaningful and you intend to uh, work the steps, that you'll leave a comment or at least hit the like button and the bell so that you'll get notified whenever we post another podcast. It's supposed to be weekly. And I do hope that you will be in a place where you're ready to begin the journey of forgiveness, because I want for you what I myself enjoy and what I see in the lives of others. There is a peace that, as Scripture says, passes all understanding. And it comes not just from believing the right stuff, it comes from in your belief in Jesus, following his directions and his teachings and his actions in your own life. If you do that, the freedom that he gives you is just truly, simply staggering and beautiful and amazing. I'd like to have that for you. So tune in next week. We'll be going over step 2. Again, we'll do these in 4 weeks. That's way faster than you should be taking the steps, but it's a way to get the information out there. You can always refer back to these previous podcasts as time marches on. I do hope that you'll work the 4 steps of forgiveness, because I want the benefits that come from that for you. So I hope you have a great week. I hope that if you're up in the middle of the night thinking about the wrong that was done you, that you'll remember these words and get up in the morning and decide to take the first step. Write the story. Write it in all of its nuttiness and craziness and darkness and hurt and pain, and then let it sit for a while and go back and write it again, and then do the process at least one more time. So God bless you on your road to forgiveness and freedom. And we'll post again next week on step 2, which is naming or identifying the hurt. Thank you.